From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
President Biden gives a speech in Philadelphia attacking MAGA Republicans as the August jobs report shows hiring, but also a higher unemployment rate. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, columnist Alicia Finley and editorial board member Mine Ukwe-Barua. Welcome and happy Friday to you both. On Thursday night in prime time, President Biden was in front of Independence Hall in Philadelphia, backlit by some dramatic red lighting, and here's a piece of what he said.
MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution. They do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. They refuse to accept the results of a free election. And they're working right now, as I speak, in state after state, to give power to decide elections in America to partisans and cronies, empowering election deniers to undermine democracy itself. MAGA forces are determined to take this country backwards.
Alicia, what did you make of the president's address Thursday?
I think it's easily one of the most divisive, if not the most polarizing speech that he has given. And in fact, that I have heard a president in recent, or for as long as I've been living, that I've heard a president give. I believe Donald Trump got a lot of criticism for his dark rhetoric around immigration. But in Biden's speech, he basically slandered half of the country. He didn't really call them fascist or semi-fascist, but he accused them of trying to tear down democracy, deny people equality or the right to vote. That they believe that the way to bring themselves up is by tearing other people down. He really, with broad brushstrokes, accused anyone who is criticizing his policies as a MAGA Republican. This is a guy who ran in 2020 on being a moderate, a compromiser, bringing people together. He did the opposite in this speech, even while he tried to say, well, I'm not really a president for the blue America or red America, echoing a famous line from Barack Obama. But again, he was very divisive, used a lot of straw men, just actually like Barack Obama did. But it was very caustic, and I don't think that that's actually going to play well with most Americans.
Well, speaking of straw men, I do think that if the media fact checkers want to go in on this speech, there are a couple of pretty good targets. One I would point to is that President Biden again brought up this idea that MAGA Republicans are going after contraceptives. And I just don't think that there's really much evidence for that. If you look at the Gallup polling, 92% of Americans say that using contraceptives is morally acceptable. And the idea that there is some movement to end that, I just don't think washes with the facts. As Alicia mentions, President Biden said again that there is a movement by MAGA Republicans to take away the freedom of people to vote in the United States. And that's the kind of claim that I think would get a pants on fire rating if another prominent politician said it. The other thing that strikes me, Mine, is it seems like the point of the speech was to elevate President Trump back into a campaign point in the 2022 midterms that we're soon approaching, and kind of suggests that January 6th is representative of the whole Republican Party.
I think that if you look at the comments that President Biden has made publicly over the past few months, they've been gradually becoming a little bit more political. Obviously, the midterms are coming, and he knows that his job as leader of the Democratic Party is to set the tone that his candidates are going to run on, his party's candidates, rather. And so he's been using the term MAGA Republicans pretty frequently in almost every address he's had in front of a podium for the past few months. And it's obvious that he wants to put the idea in people's minds that this is still Donald Trump's party in total, that these candidates, regardless of what they choose to run on in their own districts, whether it's the economy, whether it's sort of fighting inflation, are fundamentally still linked to Donald Trump, and that if they're elected to office, they're going to be going there to do his bidding. And so that's the purpose of the speech that he gave last night. And it seems to be working, to be honest. It really does seem, if you look at some of the shift in the poll numbers over the past couple of months, that as President Trump has re-entered the limelight, and particularly after the raid that took place on Mar-a-Lago a couple of weeks ago, we have seen that start to affect the reputation of Republican candidates sort of in a variety of districts around the country. And so it does seem to be a pretty shrewd strategy from President Biden, even if he is stretching the truth with a lot of the claims in the ways that you described.
What's interesting about this is that President Biden would prefer if the 2022 midterms were about Donald Trump. And again, it seems like Donald Trump also has the same idea, not only in the way that he is playing in some of these races and endorsing candidates, but in the way that he's continuing to make news in the political arena. And here's a headline Thursday in the Washington Post: Trump vows pardons, government apology to Capitol rioters if elected. And I haven't looked closely enough at that interview to see if Trump hedges it in any way and says, well, I'm not talking about the people who assaulted police officers on January 6th. My guess is that's what he would say if he were asked to defend that comment. On the other hand, in a lot of these places, you've also seen MAGA Republicans who are not winning these races. In Georgia, there was Governor Brian Kemp was reelected. Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, who was one of the chief Trump antagonists in 2020, he was elected handily. In Missouri, I think you would say that Eric Greitens might have been the MAGA Republican candidate. He did not win his primary. And meanwhile, some of the Republican candidates who did win, now that they're past the primary stage, they're busy scrubbing their websites of some of these claims about 2020 mass fraud that they can't defend to the general electorate. And so, Alicia, I mean, I think that there's a bit of a battle going on in some of these Republican races, but I don't think it's fair to say at all that January 6th, the MAGA people own the Republican Party. In fact, I think most Republicans are ready to move on from Trump.
I agree. And one thing that really bothers me is the MAGA. Well, what is MAGA? Liberals want to define it as anyone who has supported Trump or what they describe as a radical position, maybe on abortion, people who are pro-life, and even without exceptions for rape or incest. Now, I don't necessarily think that that's a good policy position for some Republicans to take, but that's basically Biden and the Democrats are lumping in everyone who they call, quote unquote, extreme as a MAGA Republican, as a Trump supporter. Trump, while he was in office, the HHS policies did try to, in some ways, restrict abortion through Medicaid reimbursements and such. But he's long been a pro-choice Republican. And so I think there's a lot of nuance and complexity in terms of Republicans and where they stand. And to your point about them wanting to move on, some polls do show that he has 40% of support in a potential 2024 race primary with Republicans. And I'm a little skeptical of that. I think there's just actually not been much education or name recognition for some other potential contenders, including Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis. And they just actually, as much as we in intellectual circles or educated circles, we talk about them and we know a lot about them. Most Americans don't. What a lot of people, Republicans, really liked about Trump was kind of his pugilistic attitude. He's willing to fight and stand up and say things that were un-PC. And I think there's a certain irony here in that Democrats are actually just kind of stirring the pot here. And the more they try to take down Trump, whether it be with the Mar-a-Lago raid or bring him into the news, the more they actually rally Republicans, even Republicans who really don't like Trump, who want to move on, they kind of increase the support for him and say, yeah, what you guys are doing isn't quite fair. So they keep him in the news, but they also keep a low level of support for him.
And Democrats also are continuing to spend money in support of some of these candidates that President Biden would call ultra MAGA Republicans. They did that in primaries, Republican primaries in Michigan, in Colorado. Here's another one in New Hampshire. I'll read the top of a Politico story. Democrats are once again meddling in a GOP primary, this time in a competitive New Hampshire House district with the goal of elevating a far-right candidate over a moderate backed by GOP Governor Chris Sununu. And it's a Democratic group that is spending $94,000 on cable TV. So, Monet, I mean, that's another bee in my bonnet here, is that would have been something meaningful for President Biden to do. He could have gone out yesterday in front of Independence Hall and said, we need to protect our democracy. And therefore, I'm calling on the Democratic Party, my party, to stop funding these candidates who think the 2020 election was stolen and, stop helping them get into a general election debate with Democrats. I think that would have been a very straightforward, simple, credible thing for him to do. And yet there was no chance, I think, that he would do that.
Well, right. I don't think you have to think about it too hard to realize the reason why President Biden wouldn't take that step. And that's because the argument that he and so many of these other Democrats are making about the threat posed to democracy or the threat of violence from conservatives in the United States is completely exaggerated for political purposes. On the one hand, they want to be able to claim that our democracy has never been more at threat and that President Trump and people who are associated with him, if you elect them back into office, they're going to be able to basically curtail democracy, install themselves personally, and trample a whole bunch of civil rights. But we know that they can't really believe that, because if they did, you wouldn't have this massive funding apparatus that has been contributing to the campaigns of conservative candidates throughout the country over the course of the past year. And their strategy on that front really has to be seen to be believed. I mean, they're taking out ads, as you said, in places like Michigan, Colorado, and basically pretending to be criticizing the sort of Trump-associated candidates. So they'll say things like, this candidate has a 100% rating with the National Rifle Association, and they're too conservative for Colorado or too conservative for Michigan, knowing full well that the conservative audiences who see these ads are going to be more likely to take notice of those candidates and potentially even cast votes for them in the Republican primaries in those places. So it gives them a little bit of plausible deniability about what they're doing, but still it's very clear that they want to run against as many Trump-associated Republican candidates as they possibly can, because they think that's going to give them an advantage in the general election. So their strategy is ultimately very cynical. I think the question is it going to work? And so far, they've had mixed results there.
Hang tight. We'll be right back. You're listening to Potomac Watch from the Wall Street Journal.